The views expressed in this podcast are those of the individual speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or policies of their organizations or of Oracle or its affiliates.
In Formula One, every decision and every second can define a championship. But when the stakes are at their highest and there's no margin for error, is technology alone enough? Or does human judgment remain the ultimate competitive advantage? Hello everyone, I'm here today with Martin Galpin, Head of Technology at Oracle Red Bull Racing. Martin, we're going to have a fantastic session, I'm sure, probably one of the most exciting video series we've done. Let's get right into it. So Martin, can you just talk about your role at Red Bull? What is it that you and your team do?
Sure, thanks for having me. I'm Martin. I'm Head of Technology at Oracle Red Bull Racing. We are a group of software engineers and data science that work on projects for the entire campus. We work on aerodynamics, vehicle performance, race strategy, the simulators, thermodynamics, and then we have some machine learning and data science projects that look across all of those different functions. The overall goal of what we do in the department is to build the software we can't buy from others. So software that differentiates ourselves from our competitors.
So I imagine, and obviously I realize there's a lot of things you can't go into because of, company confidentiality. But I imagine a lot of what your team does is that sort of that secret sauce, that extra thing that allows you to go a little bit further. Can you talk a little bit about what the role of technology is in things like developing race strategy or modeling the car or just getting that little extra oomph?
I think Formula One is a unique environment compared to most in as far as I think simulation, modeling, data has been part of how we operate for decades. I think Oracle Red Bull Racing were a lot quicker to recognize the value of software and modeling on driving car performance. And I think the rest of the grid is now catching up to that. I think AI is obviously driving a lot of that. But I think fundamentally in Formula One, with the restrictions we have now for testing at the track, for the wind tunnel, and for CFD, fundamentally most of your car development relies on the tools that you have available to you. So it is pretty fundamental in designing a winning race car these days.
And what was it about the Oracle Red Bull Racing that kind of made you have that focus on software engineering where perhaps some of your competition weren't? Was that a design ethos from the start when the team was set up, or was that all down to you and your team?
No, I mean, I've been at Oracle Red Bull Racing for over 10 years now. So I've been there a long time, but largely I think the culture or the philosophy and the investment in simulation and modeling was a lot earlier than that. I think I guess the easiest way to think about it is that the leadership at Red Bull from the technical side comes from a very modeling heavy background, and I think that has brought a culture of approaching problems in a computational way that when you go back 15, 20 years was actually quite novel. Whereas now we've accumulated 20 years of experience in the problems where maybe others have 5, 10. And the tools that we have and the foundations that we've laid over the years, I think are a large part of the continuity of success we've had over the last decade.
And it's clearly showing in the results. Now, Martin, you spoke just a few moments ago about some of the limitations when it comes to things like testing and simulation, which was a surprise to me because, the impression I have is that you're pretty much unconstrained, but that's not the case, is it? Can you just give some color around what these limitations are?
Yeah, I mean, there was a time when we were unconstrained, but that was 20 years ago now. We have a budget cap to start with. So we have an overall cap on the amount that we can spend in a given year. We have restrictions on track testing. So we are only allowed to run this year's car at a certain number of events a year. Most of those are pre-season. So there's no opportunity to run the race car outside of race events during the season, other than some marketing events. And then we have restrictions on the wind tunnel. So how much time we have to test the model of the car before we build components and to develop the aerodynamics, as well as some regulation around the computational time to do CFD, so fluid dynamics. So the only real areas at the moment that are not constrained is the simulation tools, with the exception of the wind tunnel and CFD, obviously. So it puts a higher importance on those tools being good.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is why sort of the talent really comes in, having people in the team that can just sort of be highly creative or squeeze the absolute nth degree out of a piece of technology. Are there any limitations on the technologies that you can use at all within Formula One?
There's not really limitations on the technology itself. There's just limitations on the constraints of how you use it. So, as I say, the cost is one aspect. But if we take, say, the CFD regulations, where obviously the fluid dynamics is more cost effective than building a model and running in a wind tunnel, but the constraints are such that there's not an unlimited amount of compute capacity that we can use to do CFD in an attempt to bias the advantage away from teams who can buy more compute capacity than others. So yeah, there's not really a constraint on the technology as such, but there is constraints that change which technologies you pick and how you approach problems.
And just talking a little bit more specifically about AI, where are you using AI today? You know, can you give an insight into what sort of areas of the business where AI is playing a pivotal role?
So I think when we talk about AI, obviously AI is lots of different modeling techniques, lots of different applications of technology. Again, at Red Bull, I think we were quite early in that journey, and as far as we've had a machine learning group in the department since I think 2016, so almost 10 years now. And obviously the landscape for AI has changed a lot in that time. But it really depends where in the spectrum of car development you look. There's aspects where, like other organizations, we can use more recent AI to drive efficiency and operational efficiency in terms of information retrieval and building software systems that are better integrated and smarter. But then there's also aspects closer to the car where perhaps we can use machine learning techniques to either, let's say, model sensors on the car to reduce mass, or improve the physical models that we would normally have with surrogate modeling or other techniques. So yeah, it depends where in the organization you look, but I think the overall impact I think is everywhere now.
Yeah, it's become infused into what you do. And thinking about generative AI, is that something that you and your team are starting to use? It might even be in back office capability as opposed to on the car itself. But is generative AI, are you making use of the large language models at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the last few years, obviously the viability of LLMs for making tools better has become genuine. And I think, again, there's two aspects. There's using Gen AI as software engineers to build better tools faster. And then there's also using LLMs to help us build better tools that engineers use. And I think you're starting now in the last couple of years to see that becoming a reality, in addition to the gains I think that everyone is experiencing with software engineering at the moment.
Yeah, and have you seen that impact, because your background is software engineering, right? Where's the most profound impact been in that software engineering sort of continuum life cycle? Where have you seen it?
I think the biggest thing is the pace at which it's changed in the last 18 months. And I think we're at a position now in 2026 where the cost of creating code or the cost of creating software has almost fallen to zero, right? So the problem is not how you create software, but the cost of owning that software, or the cost of building the right software and maintaining it over a long period of time, is not zero. So it's kind of just changed the way you approach problems. And I think we are on that journey, like I think everyone in the world is at the moment, but I don't think anyone yet has either realized the full potential of what's happening, or have we reached the end game for what I think will happen in the next couple of years. But the way that I've built software, and most people have written software over the last decade, is not the way you would write software today. So it's already changed in a fairly fundamental way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been quite stark to actually watch that change over the last, and it's been fairly recent, it's last sort of 1 to 2 years. Okay, so look, we've been talking about the use of AI. Are there any areas where you would prefer not to use AI, or Oracle Red Bull Racing have taken a decision that actually, no, we're not going to use AI? Perhaps that's where we need a human, because at the end of the day, there are times when you want humans to exercise judgment control. Is there any areas that you perhaps would prefer not to use AI?
Many. I guess to give 2 examples, if we take how we approach race strategy, which I know we've talked about in the past, and the projects we have with Oracle over the years are pretty well documented. You would traditionally approach race strategy projects using numerical methods, Monte Carlo simulation, and over the years, part of the project we've had with Oracle has been to bring the barrier of compute capacity down so that we can run more simulation during the race. And I think the natural evolution of that tooling is towards AI, and towards, rather than taking advantage of Monte Carlo methods and law of large numbers, you try and take a more data-driven approach where you learn behavior at the track instead. But I think the key challenge with methodologies that are learned is understanding their behavior. And I think the challenge that we have in adopting that technology in race scenarios where it's heat of the moment, high stress environment, the stakes are very high, is the explainability of the technology that you use. And obviously there's lots of academic research, there's lots of progress in explainable AI over the last year, and that's it's definitely improving. But I think there's a I guess a intellectual skepticism that you have to approach it with, that means where we are at the moment, the human or the strategist on the pit wall still has to take a decision and has to understand the options he was presented with. And then if we look in another area, I think if we can model a problem physically, you would model it physically, right? So I think where machine learning particularly, maybe slightly different to AI, helps is the ability to learn models from data that they are very difficult to model physically. And I think that balance of when it's right to use a physical model and when it's right to use a data-driven model is always a challenge in Formula One. Sometimes you want to use a data-driven model, but maybe the data is too sparse, so you can't. But the trade-off between physical or data-driven modeling, I think, is probably the biggest challenge that we have.
Yeah, and I think anyone watching this interview would be quite reassured to know that there's still a human exercising that decision in the pit, right? Because otherwise, potentially the race could get a little bit too boring, right? If we knew the AIs were controlling it. Can I just ask a question based on sort of where you see things going? So first, what I wanted to ask is your team and software engineering, are you seeing a change in the profile of the software engineer and people that are being brought in and recruited into Red Bull Racing, or not? You know, has that changed over the last couple of years? Do you see it changing in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. At the moment, I'd say we haven't consciously changed our hiring practices, as in I think it's premature to trade people for technology at this point in time. And obviously there's question marks about whether we should do that as a society anyway. But I think clearly the work that a software engineer does has changed, and that is genuine today. And I think that the way you will approach entry-level software engineers or graduates now and over the next few years will also change in terms of understanding the right way to use this technology to accelerate things that you build, but also creating an environment where junior engineers continue to learn, right? Because cognitive atrophy is real, and the more you use Gen AI to write software, particularly in your early stages of your career, the less perhaps you learn about the systems you're building. So I think, yes, today the impact is profound. We're still on that journey of figuring out exactly what it is that we need to change. But for sure, over the next 3, 4, 5 years, there will be, I think, a revolution in the way that you approach building software, which we're only now starting to understand.
Again, that's really encouraging to hear, because I think there's still this need to hire problem solvers, right?
Exactly.
And that's a very human quality. Yes, AI can do a large amount of that, but the creativity and that innate problem solving, that curiosity, you know, there's no substitution for that, right?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that it depends what you think the value in a software engineer is. Is the value in a software engineer in the code that we write, or is it in the tools that we build and our understanding of how you marry requirements to tools or to outputs and outcomes? And I think you'll see it bias more towards that domain understanding more than it is the practice of coding.
I completely agree. Yeah, the domain expertise will always trump that. Since we're talking about software engineering, there'll be a number of people watching this kind of thinking, you've got a dream job, Martin, right? Myself included. Do you mind just giving us a little bit of insight into your own personal journey? I mean, how did you arrive at this position? You know, what was your background?
The journey.
I guess the first thing to say is, yeah, obviously, I'm very lucky to do what I do. I get to go to work every day and enjoy the problems that we work on and the people I work with. You know, it really is a luxury to work with people that are smarter than you, that you can learn off all day. You know, whether or not it's the software engineers we have or people in the other engineering functions that are truly world class in aerodynamics and vehicle dynamics. So that's the first thing, is to recognize that, yeah, I am very lucky. In terms of how I got there, I've been involved in motorsport a very long time. I used to race cars as a kid. I won races and championships, but eventually had to get a real job. I also studied computer science, so naturally computer science and racing cars. Obviously, Formula One is the kind of nexus of those two desires, I guess. And then I started off working at a former team. I was there for 5 years, and then I moved to Red Bull over 10 years ago now. And I've really enjoyed pretty much every year that I've been at the team.
Excellent, very good.
Definition dash.
Martin, we're going to have a little bit of fun, if that's okay, and then we'll come back to a few more serious questions. I always do this sort of quick fire round. So the idea behind this is you've got about 30 seconds. Whatever comes to your mind first, one sentence or one word answer. There is no right or wrong. Okay, here we go. One word for AI today.
Potential.
Nice. One word for AI in 5 years.
Revolutionary.
Nice. AI agents, hype or real shift?
Real shift.
Very good. The biggest risk in AI right now?
Not understanding the technology.
Biggest opportunity?
Productivity gains.
Very good. One thing leaders consistently get wrong?
Misunderstanding the technology.
Okay, the bell's gone, but I'm still going to ask you one more question. If there were one AI term you wish people would stop using, what would it be?
People's preoccupation with RAG at the moment is something I hear a lot. And I think that comes back to misunderstanding the technology and thinking that we can apply some of these techniques to every problem and it leads to good outcomes.
Yeah, That's interesting. RAG, yep. I thought we'd got past the RAG discussion, but it seems to be hanging around, doesn't it?
Yeah. I'm hoping it's not got long.
Right. So I wanted to sort of look a little bit further out. 2 years is a long time in Formula One, so I won't ask you to plot forward more than 2 years. But where do you see the use of technology being applied to Formula One evolving over maybe the next 12 to 18 months? If you can sort of look out, please.
I think the role of technologies will just continue to grow in terms of its impact. I think, as I say, we've been data-driven and simulation modeling led for decades. But I think that if the trend of development or the rate of development in modeling techniques increases in a way anywhere similar to LLMs for foundational models in physical modeling, I think you could start to see real profound impact across actually the way that you design the car. Obviously, LLMs help you with the building of better tooling for engineers to use, but they are unlikely to help an engineer come up with a novel solution or for you to model a problem in a different way. And I think you're starting to see signs that similar trends are happening in foundational modeling for physics, for fluid dynamics, and I think that the impact of that change will potentially be greater than what we've seen at LLMs in terms of the actual direct impact on car performance.
Yes, absolutely. And one more question. This whole series is called AI Changes Everything. Is there one particular thing that you think AI should not change, or even if we can change it, we should leave it alone? Where should it not be used?
I think we shouldn't be approaching problems thinking that AI replaces what a person does. Whether, as I say, we said earlier about a strategist on the pit wall, but I think it also applies in software engineering and other areas of the team. I think Formula One is fundamentally a war of brains, and I think that you still want to have the best people, and I think the AI acts as a superpower for them in order to be more effective, but it doesn't replace them. And I think, when we approach the adoption of AI and the introduction of it into the tools that we build or the organization, we still have to, I think, value the experience of humans and engineers.
Absolutely. Well said.
AI prompt of the week.
Martin, one of the questions I always ask is, do you have a favorite prompt or a way that you tend to interact with the LLMs that you'd perhaps like to share?
I think it's quite easy to take for granted just how much information and knowledge you have available to you at any moment now. And one thing I find myself doing more by default is talking through technical problems, design, algorithms, architecture with an LLM or a chatbot as my default for how I solve problems. And I guess more specifically in terms of prompts, when I'm doing that, I find that sometimes you actually really have to ask the LLM, are you sure? Are you sure? Can you check that before you really arrive at the right answer?
Very good. That's great advice for all of us. Thank you. Well, Martin, unfortunately, we've come to the end of our discussion. I think we could go on talking for ages. And I have to say, I think you've given us a rare insight into what's going on behind the scenes of Formula One and Oracle Red Bull Racing. So thank you very, very much. I really appreciate your time. And for everyone else watching, I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I certainly have. And I'd encourage you, if you want to watch more interviews and discussions in this series, go to oracle.com/AI Changes Everything. Martin, thanks again.
All right, thank you.